Welcome back, awesome people, to Cooking from Scratch. It's Melissa and it's St. Patty's Day. Or it's a couple of days after St. Patty's Day, depending on if you're making this for your St. Patrick's Day dinner or if you're reusing St. Patrick's Day leftovers. So today for St. Patty's Day, not only are we going to celebrate some of the classic meals, but we're also going to celebrate my favorite part of St. Patrick's Day. The Guinness. Yes, this is in practically every step of my cooking. You don't have to use it. I just love it because it really adds a lot of flavor to the corned beef and to the cabbage rolls. So, grab yourself a Guinness if you're of legal drinking age. Crank up the music and let's get cooking. So what are we making today? We are bringing together some St. Patrick's Day classics and turning them into something a little bit different. To get us started, you're going to need So one of the nicest things about this dish is that it comes together relatively quickly, and it's a great way to reuse some of your dishes from St. Patrick's Day. So let's start with the hardware. What you're gonna need to get us started is what's called a double broiler, which is basically just a really fancy term for a pan with a bunch of holes in it, sitting over another pan with water. Now you don't need a lot of water. You only need about so much. You don't want the water to get too close to the bottom of this pan because otherwise you're actually going to scorch the cabbage. We just want enough to create some steam that's going to come in there and help to wilt the cabbage a little bit. For our cabbage, we're actually going to use Savoy cabbage. Not your typical green cabbage. This one is a little bit more delicate and a little bit sweeter. I will warn you though, it has a very veiny look on the backside, which can be a little off-putting sometimes on the aesthetics, but the flavor is wonderful. So we're going to take our leaves of our Savoy cabbage and we're going to put it into our double broiler. We're not looking to super cook this. We just want to wilt them a little bit, just so that way it will help to start to break down the fibers in that stem. That stem's pretty rigid. The leaf is actually pretty pliable. We could almost wrap it completely, but we do want to break this down a little bit. Now, we don't want to overcook the cabbage. That's a place where a lot of people tend to go wrong, myself included, when it comes to cabbage. Cabbage is cruciferous, meaning there are sulfur compounds inside of the vegetable. So if you cook it high and fast, it'll stay nice and sweet and tender. But if you cook it for too long, get ready for the wonderful scent of gym socks. We're gonna take the lid, put it on just lightly. We don't want to super cover this because that adds pressure to the mix. And we're gonna put this on a stove to about medium high so that we can start to get a boil going, get the steam going. Check on this in about 10 minutes and let's see how it's wilted down. Now, while that's underway and your oven is preheating to 400 degrees, let's take a look at the dipping sauce because we're going to want these flavors to come together a little bit before the actual dish is ready. What we are making is a little bit of a twist on your traditional mustard horseradish dip that you normally used with corned beef. We're going to add a little bit of Guinness to this to really bring some more flavor to the party and to thin it down a little bit so that way it makes a nice dipping sauce. So we're going to take a couple of stems of fresh dill. If you're not a fan of dill, you can always use parsley. You can use pretty much any kind of herb. Thankfully, dill is one of the easier ones to chop up. We're just gonna take these fine leaves off and leave the stalk there. Now, dill does not like to share the stage. Dill is something of a diva, so use sparingly or all you'll taste is dill. But since we're partnering this up with horseradish and mustard, we're also a bit culinary divas on their own. We're not too worried about it. Bunch this together. And basically we're just gonna use a nice rocking motion. So put the blade down, hand on top, and you're just gonna lift and rock. And just rock back and forth, and back and forth. Change up the angle, put all this back together, and keep going. This is a great way to mince herbs because it uses the pressure of the other herbs next to it to kind of keep it from flying all over your cutting board. Oh, it adds a lovely scent in the air. Now to this, I'm gonna do a 2 to 1 to 1 ratio. Starting with our sour cream, we're gonna use 2 parts sour cream to 1 part horseradish to 1 part mustard. I'm gonna take 2 big heaping teaspoons of the sour cream, followed by 1 heaping teaspoon of our horseradish. Now, if you can find it and grate it fresh, the fresh taste of horseradish is second to none. But a lot of grocery stores don't happen to carry it, so in a pinch, you can always get in the condiment aisle. And then 1 decent size spoonful of our mustard and some good twist of salt and pepper. Now I'm gonna whisk this together first before I introduce the Guinness, simply because I want this to pick up everything from inside the bowl, and then I can add Guinness as I go to make sure I don't make it too thin or too thick. All right. Add in the Guinness. So I'm gonna want this actually a little bit thicker than what you would normally associate with like a vegetable dip, and more on the order of a salad dressing. So there's a little bit of cling, but it won't stand up on its own. Oh, that's really good. This may be my new favorite dip. So while we're waiting on the cabbage, let's talk about the stars of the show here. The first one is the corned beef. Now, if you've never had or made corned beef, it's actually really easy. It's just very time intensive. So corned beef generally comes in 2 different cuts. You have the point end and you have the flat end. Really, either cut for me tends to work the same. When I get corned beef, it's really just kind of driven off of price. Now, as a kid growing up, I loved corned beef. It was just something about the flavor that, for me, it wasn't boring beef. It had a lot more personality, and that color, oh my God. But why do they call it corned beef? It's basically what you're doing to this beef is you're kind of pickling it to some degree. Now, they traditionally use components such as saltpeter, things that are a little bit hard to get. That's why normally you don't find people who make this from scratch on their own. They usually get corned beef from the store, and then they slow cook it or braise it in a slow cooker, which is technically what we're doing at home. What I love to do is just take a nice big piece, I cut it into good sized chunks, that just helps it to cook through, and then put it into a slow cooker, pour enough Guinness that you're almost covering it but not quite, and just let it go on high for about 6 hours. So why does it really need 6 hours? Well, this is a pretty tough cut of meat. It comes from an area not quite the nice center tender part that we like. It comes from the working area of the cow. So it's going to have a lot of flavor, but it's also going to be pretty tough. So in order to get around that toughness, we have to technically overcook it. Yeah, that's what we're doing. We're overcooking the meat. But if we're overcooking the meat, then why does it taste nice and juicy and succulent? Well, we're doing this slowly, and we're doing this in a water medium. And what those 2 things are doing together is that they're turning that collagen that's deep inside the fibers of the meat and turning it into gelatin, which, yes, that's a component of Jell-O, which makes it taste succulent and juicy, even when the meat itself is technically overcooked. But in order to get to that stage, you have to overcook the meat. However, braising, slow cooking is still one of my most favorite cooking methods, especially when I have a bunch of streams to do and I still need to get dinner on the table once my streams are done. Now, its helping hand on the stage, basically mashed potatoes. For these, I went and used Yukon Gold potatoes, and I left the skins in because personally, I'm a big fan of lumps in mashed potatoes. If you're not, totally understand. You can skin the potatoes. All this is really here to do is to help bind everything together and to give it a nice carb flavor to all the meat, all the cabbage, and all the dip. So once our cabbage leaves are done, we're going to take them and fill it with a 2 to 1 ratio of shredded corned beef and mashed potatoes, roll them up like you would an egg roll, and then we're going to put it into a baking dish. And that baking dish, we're going to put a little bit of Guinness at the bottom before we put it in the oven for 20 minutes. And what that Guinness is going to do is basically to help steam the rolls to finish cooking the cabbage and make sure that everything is heated through. Okay, our rolls just came out of the oven. They're looking pretty good. Now, if you want to fancy this up a little bit, let's take some of our dipping sauce, a couple of spoonfuls. Take the back of your spoon and just work it around. Now, let's take out one of our cabbage rolls. Now, if you're thinking this is going to hold its shape much like a lettuce wrap would, unfortunately not. This is going to have to be a knife and fork kind of a dish, but it's still going to be pretty amazing. Now, let's hopefully get that beautiful cross-section cut. Oh, that's pretty. And there you go. Oh my God, with that sauce. Oh, it's amazing. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any recipes that you'd like to see mashed together, let me know down in the comments down below. Next week, we're gonna take a look at my favorite top 5 games that feature cooking and do a recipe from one of them. If you'd like to get the notification for that, please hit the subscribe button down below to have it automatically added to your sub playlist. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you, awesome people, in the next video. Cheers!